How cool do you think that by mere chance you discover a machine from an era too old to be true, and that, from that moment on, everything you know is all different? It's amazing, isn't it? Well, for Lai Yunmu it is quite possible that thanks to the machine he has a shadow that makes him level up, you could say cleanly, but that would be a lie. He uses a shadow with hacks in order to earn skill points, experience, battle prowess, and a couple of other things. And it is that let's see. It all starts when our protagonist sees an advertisement for a new game on the street thanks to his tactile newspaper. Yunmu could be said to be a good video game player, and is dying for it. Everything was fine. He was watching his ad while drooling over the sexy girl in front of him whom he was supposed to save. And he was going to buy the game online until a boy in a sweater and hood came running over, announcing that Teacher Zion's group was coming. People began to crowd as an army of trucks was arriving in the square. There were whispers that they were watching him, and that apparently Teacher Zion was impressive to everyone except Yunmu, who was not at all interested in who the hell Master Zion was. Apparently, the ad was a clever ad, as the girl he had to save in the game caught his eye again. Yunmu, as a good gentleman, granted him his full attention again. The girl asked him to place the palm of his hand in the glowing opening of the ad. No matter how confused our protagonist was, he listened to him without stopping to think about it much, and in a matter of seconds, the ad began to absorb his hand. Our protagonist began to notice it late, and by then where he clearly wanted to remove his hand from the doomed ad. The sexy girl commented that the induction animation, go to know what the hell that was finished, and that the shadow system was officially activated. Then what seemed like an advertisement was not an advertisement, but the shadow system of our protagonist. Interesting. When his induction was over, Yunmu was cleverly scared enough to start wondering what the lightning had happened. But he stopped talking as soon as he saw his shadow move to make a rather creepy guy. Yunmu began to babble about how that guy came out of his shadow until the system showed him notifications that his materialization with his shadow had been completed, and congratulated him for having inherited that system quite successfully. Our protagonist had to read that he had to complete assigned tasks of the system to gain experience values in order to redeem it for rewards. Our boy wondered if that system was the one that was often mentioned in his novels, to which the system replied that the shadow could only be seen by himself and that it could be used to help him complete missions in shadow combat. To which Yunmu understood perfectly, embracing the idea that creepy guy who had come out of his shadow, it was actually his shadow. Our protagonist was so excited about his new acquisition that when the system let him return to the real world, he started saying that it looked like a game he knew perfectly, although the only difference was that there were going to be no reward girls. Yunmu didn't think much about going back to the system to look for a mission for his shadow. He was quite excited to know what the rewards were if he ever redeemed his experience points. He searched a little until he found an ideal. The mission was to use his shadow to execute a poor ant in the grass. That mission was quite easy, he thought, plus it gave him a point of experience. That was enough for Yunmu to send his shadow to work for the first time. His shadow listened to him. I honestly thought that the shadow was going to fly somewhere far away to execute the ant, but I did not imagine that it would be only 2 meters away from Yunmu, that it would shrink to the size of the ant, and that an underground struggle would begin. Yunmu, for obvious reasons, thought the same as me, and when he saw him shrink, he was puzzled. Even so, he did not stop watching the fight, so he sat in a corner to have a clearer vision. To Yunmu's happiness, the silly fight didn't last long. So when the system alerted him that the task of eliminating ants was more than complete and that if he wished to receive a reward, our protagonist quickly got up, starting to pathetically shout that he did want her. The system did not take long to give him his prize, and our protagonist almost fell to feel what his system had given him. The flow of energy. Our protagonist, exaltedly, began to say that he could feel the flow of energy. He also thought that things he didn't even dream of could come true. Out of thin air, Yunmu screamed. That is, he literally shouted into nothingness, calling his mom, since he felt the flow of energy and now had a chance to wake up. Yunmu ran out of the square where he was. He was so happy that he didn't hear the rumors that were being spread by people. Something had happened in his house, but he didn't know it. Even so, he ran to his house and opened the door in one fell swoop, without hearing or seeing that several police patrols, as well as a giant crowd, were outside his house. He walked in yelling at his mom that he could now make his dreams come true. She didn't shut her mouth until her mom, surrounded by several guys, shouted for her to get out of there. That's where Yunmu starts to see around and notices the scene. It happened in his head that those people were the same as a while ago. That is, Teacher Zion and his army of cars. His mother yelled at him again to run, but he was completely petrified. So much so that he didn't notice the police officer behind him until too late. The policeman took him and immobilized him from the head, asking him very sharply where he was going. But since Yunmu did not answer him quickly, the officer did not throw him to the ground and pointed a gun at his head. Yunmu, as a frightened person, asked the officer what the hell he was doing at home, to which the officer replied that his father had fled during a mission and all his equipment had been annihilated. So thanks to that they were conducting an investigation of the case. Our protagonist couldn't believe what the officer was saying. That was impossible. His father had been desperately protecting everyone. As much as I could. How on earth could he escape? The officer decided to release him as he did not see him as a threat. Once released, he told her not to get upset as it was just that, a mere investigation. Even so, he gave her a rather long look and let her know that if she had anything or knew anything about her father, to immediately go to them to talk. Yunmu, quite annoyed, did not think much as he got up from the ground and with a quick movement took the gun from the officer in front. Although the officer was shocked, he didn't show it much. Our protagonist, quite upset, shouted again that it was impossible for his father to have escaped. Yunmu's mother, seeing the scene, demanded to let him go, but the officer completely ignored her, telling our protagonist that the gun in his hand only worked with flux energy, so she had no chance against him. Other officers began to surround him, warning him not to play with the officer's gun. What none of them knew, and I less so, was that Yunmu did have flux energy, since his energy flow was actually flux energy. The officers around him stepped back as one blurted out that the transistor had managed to ignite, and the flow could be felt. Since our boy is not to think, he unloaded the gun to the first officer, who apparently was Master Zion. As expected, the bullet didn't surprise him one bit, but it did surprise Yunmu when Zion stopped the bullet with his hand. Even so, as nervous as Yunmu was, he was unfazed when Zion started walking towards him as if nothing had happened. Yunmu made it clear to her that she was not going to let her take her mother and stressed that her father was quite innocent. His mother, as a good mom, demanded that her son leave things as they were and that for what he wanted most, listen to the officers. His son refuted, but before he could say anything else, Zion blurted out that it was a pity that his parents couldn't watch him grow up. He also told her to learn, that if she did well she would have a good future and to take care of herself in the coming days. Yunmu, annoyed with life in general, and with tears rolling down his face, didn't want to continue to hear it, but what Zion said to him afterwards made him a little stunned. He basically let him know that he believed his father was innocent, but he still couldn't do anything for him until things were explained, and he made it very clear that if he wanted to save them both, Yunmu would have to awaken the flux energy as soon as possible. Letting him know that, he left with all his officers and his mother, leaving Yunmu alone. Yunmu wasted no time, so after crying, she wiped her tears and got down to work. He knew that the energy awakening test was done once a year, and that the next week one was done, so he grabbed book by book in his library to find out about his energy. And, while he was in search of knowledge, he asked his system how many experience points were needed in order to awaken his energy, to which the system let him know that he needed 10,000 points for that, and that Yunmu's own sensitivity could also be converted into experience points. Do you know what that means? No, neither do I. Let's continue. Our protagonist was foolish to hear that, so he thought with considerable difficulty if it was necessary to kill 10,000 ants in just 1 week in order to awaken the blessed energy. The system told him that the same system can be hacked on its own, that there was no need to intervene and that it could be continuously updated. Yunmu was starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel when he learned that, so he immediately demanded that the system turn on the automatic hack immediately, to which the system obeyed him. The boy once thought that the automatic hack turned on that it was not too late to start the hack with his shadow, and that he also needed to cultivate continuously during the rest of the week in order to awaken his energy. He took his 100-way book to feel the flux energy, but before he opened it he had a small memory where he saw his dad while he was riding on top of his head, hearing that his dad would protect him from anything. Tears ran down Yunmu's cheeks, but he quickly took them away to say out loud that it was now his turn to protect his father. A week later at Jiefeng City School, Yunmu's third-year classmates that day would mark the beginning of the most important day of their lives. That is, the day of the flux exam. 100% of their energy was expected of them, but if they did not pass the test, they were still expected to be able to work hard and become useful people for society in some future. The teacher in Yunmu's classroom began to say that if the flux energy could be felt, the people who achieved that would join the guard army so that they could fight the dimensional beasts and become a noble soldier. In other words, the students came to awaken that energy would become heroes admired by millions of people. He also let it be known that there was no one who had not awakened the flux energy, but regardless of whether or not they could awaken it, he would be proud of them. Yunmu was supposed to be putting more than all his attention on the class, but guess where he was? Well, if they thought I hadn't made it to class on time, then they were right. Out of nowhere, he appeared almost knocking down the door of his living room, shouting an apology for being late. He looked tired and with dark circles, that was more than evident. He also looked scared because after he arrived, he finished the class, left the classroom and sat in some chairs that had his schoolyard. He heard that Wang Wangju did not awaken the flux energy, but that he was very close to doing so. Sweating and looking quite agitated, Yunmu was thinking that he almost missed the last day of school. He also noticed that there were fewer people than on regular school days, so it seemed that many of those people decided to simply drop out of the test long before taking it. Several thoughts kept running around his head until he heard someone calling him. A blonde boy, followed by what looked like two fools, began to strike up a conversation with Yunmu, asking him if he was not going to give up the evaluation since Yunmu is not expected to be so aware of himself. The blonde was Kaian Fei. He was the son of a rich businessman in the city. He studied with Yunmu since they shared the same year, and he was also an idiot. The two fools who accompanied Fei began to say that the whole city knew about his affinity, so they didn't understand why he wanted to be prestigious since his dad had escaped and let his entire squad die. Yunmu's classmates began to pile up and then whispered rumors they had heard from him and his dad. That made Yunmu feel pretty bad, and he was going to leave if it weren't for Zhang Kai, who came from beyond to tell him the truths in Fei's face. He sent him and everyone around Yunmu to get lost, as well as telling Fei that he was a presumptuous smug man who only knew how to bark. He kept talking, telling the other people that not long ago they were praising Yunmu and now that his family was in crisis everyone is ridiculing him. The people and Fei dissipated without thinking twice, making Kai snort and Yunmu relax. Our protagonist thanked his friend and his friend told him that it was not necessary to be so polite with him, asked him how his father was and smiled at him to keep him calm. Yunmu replied that there was nothing to worry about, that his dad was still under investigation, and to start walking so that they would both stand in line for the exam. Kai was going to do exactly what his friend asked until someone else, a girl with purple hair, pink eyes and curves, quite pretty, they called Yunmu. She was Lin Lai, the childhood sweetheart of none other and nothing less Yunmu. She asked him if he was going to take the exam in a tone, nicely seductive, making Kai uncomfortable, saying he was going to stand in line since he didn't want to be bad and run away. Yunmu didn't give her a drop of his attention as he was completely focused on Lai, and thanks to that, he asked her if she was also going to take the exam. Lai changed the subject drastically, telling Yunmu that he had heard what had happened to his father and although it might not be the best time, he wanted to say something to our protagonist, something quite unexpected for Yunmu. Well, it turns out that our dear Lai started feeling the flux energy a few days ago. That didn't seem strange to Yunmu, so she didn't understand what Lai meant, so she kept opening her mouth, letting it be known that it was very selfish of her to tell her that at the time. But she still wanted to move forward, so she wanted to go in to glimpse the upper dimensional world. And if there was even a small chance of her coming in, he really wanted to do it, for which he apologized and well, it is that let's see, it is known where the conversation was going, so Yunmu, to avoid such humiliation, although he thought and was more than correct that all the compliments he received from people in general was for the position his father had and that all the talks he had had with Lai of being a perfect couple were pure nonsense. Yunmu turned and started walking towards the exam line. Lai, although she called him again so that she could tell her what he had to say. Our protagonist, the only thing he let her know before he completely walked away from her was that he understood what she meant, and wished her good luck in the blessed exam. Honestly, I would have more to tell him, but for something he is our protagonist, really. Yunmu passed by Kai's side, causing Kai to yell at him to come to him, who had saved him a place in line. He apparently ignored it, kept moving forward until he reached the small screen where the place of the exam would be given. It wasn't his turn. Obviously, it was Fei's turn, but that didn't matter to Yunmu in the least as he pushed him to roll the stairs Yunmu had just climbed. The teacher who was guarding the exam process yelled at our protagonist, demanding why he had to push Fei out of his place and why he skipped the line. He also let Yunmu know that his father no longer retained any power anywhere, to which Yunmu replied that why would he have to think about such things? That is, why they had to lower him solely for his father. Did they think that our Yunmu could not be a fluxer? It was very gratifying when Yunmu put his hand on the screen and all his energy started flowing too much. Everyone was very surprised to see such exuberant power. Even the professor himself was amazed at such a magnitude of power that when he announced that Yunmu was indeed a fluxer, he had some difficulty continuing to breathe. The one who had broken the air of tension at that time was Kai, sliding his arm across his friend's shoulders, cheerfully congratulating him, telling him that from now on, no one could underestimate him at all. While that was happening, below, in the audience there was a mysterious guy who was more surprised by Yunmu since he did not think to find someone with so much power since he managed to awaken his energy naturally, and without external help. It turns out that the mysterious guy, when he went up to the stage to give him a purple box where the Flux Disciple emblem was Yunmu so that he could now enjoy every privilege and benefit that the Alliance granted to the Flux Disciples, was none other than Master Zion. Master Zion let Yunmu know that he was more than proud and was waiting for him at Yunbao Station within a mere month so that he could work with him. Moreover, he told him that he welcomed him on behalf of Jiefeng City and on behalf of the Fluxer Guild. Instead of Yunmu grabbing that box, Kai went ahead of him. The boy took the box and then put on a rather strange face and told Teacher Zion that the hell was him. The officer didn't answer him, so Yunmu saw the perfect time to let go of Kai. Surely Yunmu was going to say something to the officer, but as soon as the words were going to come out of his mouth, our dear Lai appeared on the scene again. She started calling our protagonist again. But when she started babbling, Yunmu saw an opportunity to interrupt her. The boy didn't know what to say about what had just happened, but after thinking about it for a moment, while he was passing her, he blurted out the same words she had said to him when they were ending. So while Yunmu told her that he really wanted to go in to take a look at the higher dimensional world and apologized to her, Lai looked at him dumbfounded. Hours after that gratifying scene, our protagonist was at home, talking for his mother on the phone, telling her that it was true that he had awakened the energy, and that his father would not have to continue bearing the responsibility for his actions. Besides that they would now receive better treatment. Her mother replied that she did not have to worry about her, that she should rather take care of her father who was in the hospital, and that she should please tell him that she would visit him soon. With that, the call ended. Seconds later, Yunmu saw his badge and wondered if that was the Flux Disciple badge everyone dreamed of having. And it was pretty obvious why everyone wanted one. That badge could be used as a verification to open up a storage space in the fourth dimension, and the virtual dimensional world could be accessed. Once that thought passed through Yunmu's head, he was excited because now he could enter the virtual dimensional world. So without proposing it any longer, he got out of bed and threw himself into the virtual dimensional world. The system warned him that his journey was about to begin, so activating badge verification was key. Once that verification was successfully completed, the system let him know that Yunmu was Flux Disciple number 930.664 and that he had access to enter the dimensional world. When I said that Yunmu had thrown himself into the virtual dimensional world once and for all, he meant it. Suddenly, all the space he knew as his house disappeared, releasing it into a kind of blue crystalline square with dolls similar to mannequins. Yunmu was frightened to see them standing there, but became more frightened to see a giant pink rabbit jumping towards him. He wondered what the hell that thing was, to which the giant pink rabbit replied that, after he stopped jumping, that he was his guide and that he could call him Pei de Luo. A explained that the world he had just entered was one where he could obtain various dimensional techniques and combat skills, plus that world was a pretty important place for practitioners to compete and improve every ounce of strength they possess. A asked them both to model their appearance for the virtual world. Yunmu looked at him quite strangely and asked him to explain himself since he was only there. The giant pink rabbit, who apparently was a giant pink dog, told him that it was obviously two people, and that he thought he was stupid. Yunmu looked at his shadow, which out of thin air had appeared behind him, and understood what the giant pink dog was saying. With nothing more to say to each other, they began to design their characters. After that task was completed, Pei told both of them that they could officially enter the dimensional world. Yunmu nervously asked Pei if they had to enter just now, but Pei did not answer. Therefore the shadow, Yunmu and he were falling into the virtual dimensional world, officially. Once they fell on their feet, because well, it's a manga at last, Yunmu admired the dimensional world so much that in the end he let it be known that it was incredible with a scream. Pei, when Yunmu stopped shouting, explained to him that the time span in that world was 3 times faster than in the normal world. Therefore, people who were often in that world used 3 times as long as ordinary people. Yunmu understood why it was no wonder that inhabitants of his normal world wanted to enter that world. When Yunmu saw people watching 2 opponents in mid-fight, Pei explained to him that this was the dimensional battlefield and that there was a virtual battle system where he could become stronger and train his fighting skills, adding that many people hone their skills in that field. Without hesitation for a second, Yunmu communicated to Pei that he wanted to go immediately towards that place, to which Pei agreed. So once after clapping, a dimensional gap opened under Yunmu, sucked him out, and left him on the battlefield. Yunmu did not understand because out of nowhere he was given 2 weapons, although faster than he wanted. He understood it when an arrow almost stuck in his sword. Yunmu narrowly dodged her, and although he was not trained, he aimed at whoever had sent it to him. Our protagonist did not expect to find basically a robot saying that this was his lucky day. That he did not expect to meet a rookie on the battlefield and that pairing up with him in his first battle was very bad luck. But he still started rolling on the floor and hiding behind the trees that were surrounding him. The robot also didn't expect him to hide, so he was a little puzzled when he did. Even so, he wasted no time and went in to look for him. But the more he entered the forest, the less he could find him. The robot let him know that he was very good at hiding, but that he was still going to find him. So instead of trying to hide, he could also take the initiative and let him help him finish the game. Robot kept looking for Yunmu, and when he saw that he still didn't find him, he began to provoke him a little. Yunmu did not fall into temptation but did come out to face him. Unfortunately for the robot, Yunmu surprised him, and when the same robot admitted to being careless, Yunmu aimed at his head and shot. Just as robot fell, our protagonist let him know that he shouldn't have been so happy before his prey reached his mouth, and told him that even ants near his house were better than him. Although the talk he gave was beautiful and deep, our protagonist began to get scared when balls of light came out of robot's body, and he was even more frightened when those balls of light entered his body and did not come out. The boy was so scared that he fell to his knees, and it wasn't until seconds later that the system explained to him what the lightning bolt had passed. It turns out that the system was congratulating him for having absorbed the balls of light. Those things were actually called special orbs, and Yunmu had absorbed them for the first time for winning the battle. The system rewarded him with an A-level skill, which was the Golden Campaign. Systema also explained that those characters he defeated and had the flux energy in the virtual dimensional world could obtain from them enough special orbs, and once obtained he could change it for cultivation methods in the dimensional stores. Yunmu, curious, asked him if those cultivations were the practices of ancient martial arts during the most prosperous period before the Dark Ages, to which the system replied that the Golden Campaign he had just obtained was an ancient defensive martial art that could reduce 30% of the damage he ever received. In addition, for each level increase, it was going to be provided with greater resistance to damage. That seemed magnificent to our protagonist, so much so that he wanted to try the power he had quickly gained. So without waiting much longer, he called Pei. He appeared. Yunmu asked him for another battle. Pei looked for her, found her. The scenario changed and Pei disappeared with a half-said warning. Yunmu was trying to understand Pei when a female voice came to her ears asking if he was her opponent. Yunmu turned around and was quite fascinated by the female silhouette that was there, given that it was a beautiful redhead holding a knife in each hand. Yunmu commented aloud to her that he didn't hit girls, but to win he had no alternative. That said, he emptied his gun on her. It was pure luck that the girl could have avoided those bullets, but he still wasted no time in yelling at him that when he launched a sneak attack he should feel ashamed of being a man. Yunmu replied that he was there to win, not to show his face. They continued to struggle for a while longer until in an attack by our protagonist, the girl asked him if he possessed ordinary flux energy. Yunmu didn't understand what he was referring to, so he asked what he was talking about. The girl told him only that he was a really ordinary flux disciple. Our protagonist still did not understand, and when he demanded to know what he was talking about, the girl asked him to forget it. Having said that, the redhead prepared to give her final attack by calling it 36 shapes of the 1,000 cuts, thus cutting our beloved protagonist into pieces. Yunmu cursed, and before disappearing, the girl let him know that his dexterity was an excellent 36 cut attack ability, adding that no one could. Apparently he was going to say that no one could escape it, and I say it was because our protagonist apparently was not sliced into thousands of pieces, so he took the opportunity to slice the redhead with one of his weapons in half. The girl disappeared without believing it, leaving Yunmu alone. The boy entertained himself thinking that the redhead's ability must be one of the ancient martial arts of attack, so it was pure luck that his Golden Campaign ability, which was from the ancient martial arts of defense, could have reduced the damage she caused. Without waiting long, the system complimented our protagonist again, this time giving him 36 points of special orbs, in addition to telling him that he had understood the basic combat skill, the Violent Blade. Yunmu was surprised to see the number of special orbs and understood that the stronger the person he defeats, the more rewards he will have. Suddenly, Yunmu was energized and asked Pei for one more battle. Pei did not appear this time, but he carried out the orders of our protagonist since he was on a different battlefield. In this chapter they did not show us that battle, But they did show us a new character who apparently knew the red-haired girl, since she said that having lost to a novice was the most intolerable thing for the redhead. In addition, she was surprised that Yunmu could have taken Kingu, who apparently is called the redhead, to perform the 36 ways to make it mince. The new character, who by the way was a girl, thinks that Yunmu must have a rare defensive ability that was not found in that world. But is he right? 3 days after what happened, Yunmu was walking in the streets of his real world, thinking that it was really troublesome to find a hospital in a big city since he had been walking for quite some time. He seemed to hate that his dad was actually getting his medical treatment in a fairly partial hospital, and he was complaining that the location was so remote. He didn't know if he could trust that medical level, yet he kept walking with a basket of fruit in his hand when he basically heard a cry for help. He got closer to the desperate fountain to hear several boys telling a girl they had cornered in an alley not to worry, that all they wanted was to play with her for a while, but that if he could accompany them all for drinks, everything would be much better. The girl denied their request delicately, saying she was quite busy, but they still didn't budge. The older boy told her that he knew his father was in serious condition and hospitalized. He also knew that she needed a lot of money for that same cause. He told her that he was not going to let everything go in vain and was going to give her a lot of money. Without expecting it, he received a basket blow to his head instead of the positive response he expected to hear from the girl. The guys who went with him quickly went to help him, but they were a little worried when our protagonist entered the scene, advising them to go and have fun somewhere else. That said, he bent down to pick up his basket, but blurted out to one of the two boys that that basket was the basket of fruit that he had bought especially for his father, but had been damaged thanks to them. The one he was talking to asked him about the money he had spent, to which Yunmu replied that he was going to have to pay it. The girl began to ask him something, since apparently she knew him, but Yunmu ordered him to stay where he was since people with the age of those three were very easy to get into trouble very often. The girl didn't say anything, but the man to whom Yunmu had thrown the basket did say something. After telling our protagonist that he was a smelly child and did not know who he was and what he was capable of, Yunmu hit him on the head with his foot so hard that the guy let out a loud cry of pain. Even so, they continued to look for trouble with Yunmu until he could with everyone, and once on the ground, he asked him if he was not ashamed to be the older brother of all of them if he had little money, and let him know that he was going to take the money from his wallet for the basket of fruits. The man whom Yunmu hit with the basket let him know that he understood, that he had already beaten his people, that he had already taken their money, but to let him go. He understood that the hero saved the pretty girl, but still asked her if he really wanted to protect the girl for life. Yunmu turned to the girl and told her that he was not going to stay with the pretty girl since the pretty girl was his sister. Once the problem was dealt with the alley lords, Yunmu and his sister started walking towards the hospital. The boy told his sister that every time he finds her he is in trouble. He didn't understand if his sister was a machine to attract all the gangsters in the city or it was just pure chance. His sister apologized to him, but Yunmu asked him not to worry because if he hadn't found her, he would never have been able to find the hospital where his father was. As they walked, Yunmu asked his sister about something the guy in the basket had said, since it stuck in his head that she needed money. He asked her why she needed it since she didn't understand it because she had been working in Yunshin City for quite some time. He also asked if he needed the money for his dad's medical expenses. His sister, who was called Ruyan, replied that her father's injury was much more serious than thought and that all the money saved all that time she worked was almost completely gone. She also told her that he could be sure that he has been working hard to raise money not to allow his father to be expelled from the hospital where he was. Yunmu questioned him why he was acting so strange or as if he was doing something wrong since he wasn't judging her at all, and that as an adopted daughter she had done more than enough. Our protagonist asked him to leave the issue of money in his hands since he was now Fluxter and had money to spare. He also thanked his sister for her hard work. Without much to say from Ruyan, they arrived at the hospital quickly. Yunmu asked Ruyan to go directly to her father's room since he would go to the front desk to pay for his medical expenses. Ruyan thought it was the idea, but still asked her brother if he knew what his dad's room number was, to which he replied that he knew. Ruyan agreed and went to her father's room. When she arrived, she announced her arrival, making her mother glad she had returned and sent her to drink some water as she looked quite tired. Ruyan listened to her mother, drank water, and while her father did, she began to tell him that it was really trouble for Xiao Yan, those who kept Ruyan busy when what she had to do was errands for old people. Ruyan laughed and told her father to stop saying things like that. Plus she told both of them that they no longer had to worry about the whole money thing since everything was solved. His father was happy and said that he was more than solved since he had found his old comrades in arms and would have followed his story if Yunmu had not interrupted his father by telling him that he did not remember having a comrade in arms like him. His father greeted him by calling him Little Moo. Yunmu asked him how he has been and if he had improved all those days when he was in bed. His half-weird father called him a bastard and said he didn't want to mention details of his recovery if he wasn't there. Yunmu changed his expression drastically when he noticed something peculiar about his father, to which his father questioned the reason for his long face since he was lying there, but there was a small problem. And that little problem was that, with everything and joke included, he could not use his legs. Everyone in the room let silence reign, until the father began to speak again, saying that why it seemed that the sky fell on them. That was not a total disaster. He was still alive, and although he could not use his legs, he still won. He kept talking and tried to move out of bed, until he added that where on earth his son had gotten so much money to pay each of his medical bills. Yunmu ordered him not to move, but replied that he had woken up, that he was a fluxer, and that he was paid for it. His father repeated the word fluxer quite incoherently until then he laughed like a baby on a stretcher. Literally, even tears came out of how loud he was laughing. He asked his son laughingly if he had really woken up or thought he was stupid and didn't realize when his son was lying. He also told him, laughing obviously, not to talk to him about waking up if he was still struggling to feel. He asked her laughing to come back to reality as he was afraid he might go crazy. Yunmu's face was priceless, but like every teenager, he was annoyed by his father's teasing, and in addition to telling him unbearable, he swore that he would not return so that the old man would manage alone. His sister gave him a passive smile, while his father told him that he spoke with the temperament of a child, so he did not understand how he could be such a fluxer. While Yunmu was in the corner of the room trying to calm down, his father asked Ruyan to help him lift a box he had in hand for him. Once on his legs, he observed his son and told him to take it. Yunmu grabbed him, and when he saw what it was, he questioned his father if that was not his combat armor that he loved and adored so much. His father answered yes, plus that armor could greatly improve the skills of whoever possessed it. Yunmu wasn't sure about taking her, so he asked his father if he was really willing to give her such a precious thing for him. His father replied that he was more than sure since he will not be able to use it anymore in any possible future, and also explained that this armor was not something that could be used as one wished, in addition to having substances of biochemical adjustments that will exceed the limit of tolerance for the most ordinary people. Although there was a great gain for the sensory and for what they had awakened their energy, that is, it was not going to be up to him to decide whether to wear it or not. It will be the armor that will determine whether Yunmu would be worthy of wearing it. After a while of silence, Yunmu told his father that he was not taking advantage of him, that although he borrowed the suit to wear it, he can be more than sure that in the future he could continue to use it since he was definitely going to find a way to get him back on his feet. With that said, it wasn't enough more for Yunmu to tell the box to turn on. Once lit, the box began to rebuild into the body of our protagonist, so Yunmu tells him to go meet its new owner. As the armor rebuilt into Yunmu's body, his father, mother, and sister were stunned by the security he emanated. Their father even said that his brat had just shut their mouths. Days later, we met Yunmu quite tired of packing his luggage as he had to leave the next day to the Fortress of the Prosperous Wind and was not going to return for a long time. The next morning, we met at the Jiefeng City Fluxers Guild, surrounded by small crowds of people. Who are they around? Well, the other young master of the Wang family, although they later realized that he was no rookie. He was not even from the Wang family. He was Luo Jin. He was the son of the father who had managed to break through the highest realm of fluxers and was a great fluxer master. But there was another boy looking at Jin, and it was Zhang Daxing, son of the richest man in Jiefeng City. Daxing was walking when he heard a girl rejoicing that the day had finally arrived. That was the granddaughter of Fluxers Guild President Liu Nuoji. The girl was walking, saying that when she reached Tianyun Fort she would be able to see her grandfather, and Daxing found that a bit interesting. Several people were saying that Jiefeng City had a lot of talents that year, and the top 8 results of the Fluxer tests were from high school and were more than fine. Another person yelled at someone who was too ignorant for letting go that 16th grade had also cultivated an awakened man. The person was more than happy to introduce Yunmu sitting on a strange chair, while 4 people were lifting him. The other students observed it quite strange, and it was not to be expected less. Who on earth makes an entrance into a throne? While Jin looked at Yunmu with a little curiosity and pity, Daxing laughed loudly, calling Yunmu an idiot. Yunmu, on the other hand, was seriously thinking that this was the exact time to die, as it was the most embarrassing time he had ever spent in his entire life. The only one who liked his entrance was Liu Nuoji, and it was only because he was an awakened man. After such a pathetic entrance, a lady, who apparently was in charge of receiving the new members, was near a building, asking the newcomers to go to where she was. When the new one stepped forward, the girl kept talking, saying that the newcomers were going to be called by list and sent in a group of 2 to Tianyang Fort. The newcomers were surprised to notice that the attendant had opened a portal, but quickly recovered. The first group to send to the fort was Jin and Daxing. Jin was not excited to be the first, let alone looked excited to be Daxing's partner. But on the other hand, Daxing was happy. He asked Jin if that was his real name and if he had teleported before in order to avoid accidents, to which Jin replied that he was very noisy, to shut his mouth. The second group to enter was Yunmu and Nuoji. The girl didn't wait for Yunmu to walk to the portal, but took her hand, introduced herself to Yunmu as they ran to the portal, and as soon as they entered, the only thing Yunmu could think about was how pretty she was and how beautiful her voice was. Yeah, in the Heavenly Cloud Castle, Yunmu thought it was very different from the lower level cities he had been to. He could have kept thinking, but Nuoji interrupted his mind by asking if he was going to keep the flower he had as a band around his neck. Yunmu reacted, tore it off, and that's where Nuoji said that he had heard his grandfather say that the castle of the celestial cloud is constantly moving in the sky, to which our protagonist asked him that he kept moving only to hear his voice. The one who answered his question was not Nuoji, it was his dean of the university, Tangan, saying that as long as the castle keeps moving, he would never be attacked by the dimensional beasts since after all, in that world all of them for the beasts were unwanted outsiders. Having said that, and introduced himself to all the students, and then asked them to all go with him, since on behalf of the prosperous Wind City Fluxer Guild, he would take them to the large inner courtyard. As they walked into the courtyard, he told them that for the next 3 years, the great inner courtyard of the prosperous Wind City would be their base camp and residence. Also that everyone should know that there were currently 7 floating fortresses in the entire central continent, and that the castle of the Heavenly Cloud was where they were. And, having said that the castle of the Celestial Cloud was where they were, asked the students to board the bus so that they could go to the large inner courtyard since they as Fluxer would use that as their base and for their activities. When the students fully boarded the bus and wasted no time and kept talking, he explained that the 7 floating fortresses ruled themselves in their own areas, just as did the castle of the Celestial Cloud who had 136 cities under its jurisdiction. He also explained that every year the newly awakened arrivals were to be transported to the higher cities to which they belonged. In addition to the higher level cities were responsible for organizing the study of theoretical knowledge and practicable training for them, and added that training to be a Fluxer had to be reliable and independent. But even if they had been successfully selected, they would not have to be happy so quickly since the annual event would be held in half a year. And what was that tournament? It was the Central State Continental Cities Qualification Tournament in which the Continental Alliance would adjust the quotas on the supplies of the resources of the cities under its jurisdiction according to the annual results of each qualifying competition. The dean hoped that everyone would take the classes seriously since after all they were the hope of supplies for the entire city. Once he wished everyone good luck, the bus arrived at its destination, and warned them and informed them that all the representatives of the prosperous Wind City lived there, and that if they had any doubts in the future they could come to him at any time. By the time the students vacated the bus, Yunmu wasted no time in calling and to tell him that the last time he defeated a girl, that is, the red-haired girl on the dimensional battlefield, his flux energy was somewhat different. He told her that this girl had a power that burned him. The dean looked at him quite surprised, to which without measuring his tone of voice asked him astonished if he had defeated Hades' collaborator. Jin, the blonde boy who was the first to enter the portal with Daxing, listened to the dean and was also shocked. In fact, he thought it was impossible for Yunmu to have won against the collaborator. Jin wasn't the only one who had listened to the dean and thought it was a lie. Some guys surrounded Yunmu to tell him that he must have a limit to brag about since they didn't believe he had beaten Hades' collaborator. Another boy told him that he was a newcomer, so how was it possible that the dimensional battlefield had paired him with an opponent who used energy from the underworld? Besides that not even Luo Jin, that is, the blonde, dared to say a thing of such magnitude and that he was saying that only to presume to be able to do the impossible. Yunmu looked at each of them and let it be known that it never crossed his mind that the power of that girl was so amazing. The dean looked at him with the face of few friends and told him that her power was not only amazing. He added that the power of her energy, that is, the power of the energy of the underworld and the power of ordinary energy were at the same level at all. Even Nuoji was included in the conversation to let it be known that Hades had a special destructive power. However, there were very few people who had the power of the underworld and were 1 in 1,000 in awakening, so if he could beat such a person, it meant that Yunmu was damn good. Yunmu, seeing Nuoji included in the conversation, asked him if he really believed what he said, if he didn't believe that he was lying. Nuoji, with a smile, let him know that he did believe him in his totality, also told him that not because he is a little-known person on the subject. He did not mean that he was weak. Yunmu blushed, so Nuoji took the opportunity to let him know that the place of accommodation is right in front, and continued to give them the tour, explaining that they had already arrived at the inner courtyard of the Prospero Wind City where the new students lived, in addition to being able to choose any room in which they wanted to stay. The students wasted no time, so they crowded around Jin to tell him that he was first in the ranking. Therefore, he was the first one who should choose some room. Some students agreed with whoever had said that since Jin was the strongest and the one from the most respected family. Yunmu, the only one who was not surrounding Jin, said without caring much that he had already chosen a room. Also thought that although the room he had chosen was a bit deteriorated, it suited him a lot so that he could manipulate the farming of his shadow. Some students had not liked Yunmu's answer, so another classmate began to tell him that he did not understand the rules since he dared to choose a room before the blonde. Before Yunmu could answer him, Daxing came out with that he had also chosen a room and it would be the one in front. The companion who had scolded Yunmu also started yelling at Daxing that they didn't realize that this was not how things were. But the guy fell backwards when an official report appeared on the bugles of the big courtyard and said that the first to choose a room had been Nuoji. Once the rooms were finally chosen by everyone, Yunmu walked into his own and was amazed as he observed that even the luxurious and large private rooms are better than those in his house. He even thought that such a place could be considered quiet and he could train more than well. There he turned on his shadow system while taking off his shoes, but the system warned him that because he had changed the world, the system was being updated, so he advised him to be patient. Yunmu didn't like his answer, but he couldn't do anything else. The next day, we can observe Yunmu arriving at the classroom, but being surprised that the only one who answered the good morning he gave was Nuoji. She, in addition, was the only one in the classroom. Yunmu asked her how she was the only one there, where the others were, and why they skipped the first day of school. Nuoji tried to explain that the first hours of the classes were theoretical. That is, they had an introduction to the basic use of flux energy, the flux energy system, the monster system, and several other classes, since most of the new ones had received those classes, in addition to the fact that they had perceived the flux energy at a very young age. So it was even faster that they had completed their theoretical knowledge before reaching the castle of the celestial cloud. Those lessons, that is, the theoretical ones, were only there for those who had recently awakened the energy. Our protagonist hated being treated like a fool, but he still thanked Nuoji for not leaving him alone. Out of nowhere, a teacher appeared, not thinking it possible for him to have students in his class, so he introduced himself saying that he was his teacher, and that they should all return to their seats. Professor Lai Bowen found it strange that Nuoji was in that class, so he asked what he was doing there. The girl replied that she was there only to visit him since it had been quite some time since the last time she saw it. Bowen laughed and questioned how her grandfather was doing, to which she told him that he was fine and in good health. Nuoji added that there were new people in his class and Bowen must teach him well since Yunmu was pretty good. Yunmu lowered his tension because from one moment to the next he became quite pale to understand that Nuoji was not going to be in that class with him. When she announced to Yunmu that she was leaving and wished him very good luck in her class, Yunmu thought that he was going to be the only stupid one to watch that class. Bowen took advantage of the girl's departure to tell Yunmu that it was the first time in quite some time that he had a new student in his class, but still in those days there were basically no more natural awakens that did not depend on his bloodline or that they had absorbed dimensional crystals. The professor, while telling him that, thought that since Yunmu had a good relationship with his master's granddaughter, he must be exceptional. The teacher, when he observed his student well, let him know that if he wanted to go somewhere else because he understood that it was uncomfortable for him to be the only one in class and be alone there. Yunmu agreed, so they left. Once they arrived at a rather unknown place, Bowen took the opportunity to tell him that he understood that he did not know anything about anything, and that he did not even know the energy system of the fluxers. Yunmu replied that everything depended on the master, so Bowen took a good breath and got to work. He explained to her that from lowest to highest the level of fluxers was ordinary crystal, black crystal, silver crystal, golden crystal, and rainbow crystal. In the next level that Yunmu passed, he could surpass the fluxer level and become a great fluxer. Yunmu appreciated the introduction, but asked him to cut to the point. That is, how could he ascend to the top of the good guys? Bowen told him that the first thing he had to do was improve his kingdom and he had to illuminate his flow points. And there were 12 flow points that could be illuminated. Those were the flow points in the left chest, in the right chest and abdomen. Those 3 points there could better strengthen their defenses, while the flow points of the feet and lower legs were used to reinforce agility. Now, the flow points on the palms of the hands and arms could reinforce Yunmu's attack, and the points on the skull sharpened the mind, reactivated nerves, 5 senses, mental faculties, and other things. Bowen hinted to him that when he had lit each point, Yunmu could reach the Black Crystal Realm. Yunmu, interested, asked him how those points could be illuminated, to which Bowen replied that it was not so difficult to illuminate those points. All he had to do was kill enough dimensional beasts, and, once dead, he would have to absorb their flux energy crystals. 3 days later, all the students were waiting in the university courtyard, which annoyed Yunmu a lot since he could not find any point in keeping them awake so early. Even so, he heard several classmates talking about him, wondering if he was not the one who had been taking theory classes with Master Bowen. Without expecting it, a black-haired guy appeared in front of Yunmu and asked him how bad he would have to be to take the theory classes since most of them have been visiting the seniors' training for the past few days and had learned quite a bit. Yunmu was stressed that this guy passed behind him since it was a pretty big headache, so he thanked Professor Bowen when he appeared for giving him his comeuppance since he told him to stop his class nonsense and get in line, after giving him a good blow with his documents. Yunmu did not expect that their teacher had told them, after getting everyone's attention, that they were going to have a practice class that they had always wanted to have. He instructed them to work in teams of 2 people, whichever they chose, and then move to different locations in order to complete that day's task. The students, quite excited, became more excited when it was revealed that the practice class was to kill 10-dimensional beasts. Yunmu was the most excited of them all because that was what he was waiting for. Professor Bowen also clarified to them that dimensional beasts would have no mercy against them just because they were students. He added that he would be there immediately if their lives were in some kind of danger of death, but that in all other cases, they were on their own and would have to rely on their own strength and those of their chosen teammates. That said, everyone started forming their teams. Jin asked Nuoji to be her teammate, but she didn't expect it, so it was a surprise to her. Still, even if he had blushed about it, Nuoji didn't want to be Jin's partner, so while he was letting go that he didn't want to accept his offer, Yunmu came out of somewhere, interrupted the conversation, and let Nuoji know if she wanted to be his partner. Nuoji accepted, so in the next chapter we see how both arrive at another dimensional world, called Ruin Number 7. It is known that the golden ticket was in the outpost, but the vileness of the dimensional beasts was not yet known thanks to what Nuoji said. Yunmu didn't pay much attention to him since something else was in his head, so without thinking about it anymore, he asked his partner why he hadn't wanted to team up with Jin since he was strong and it would be very easy for him to finish the task dictated with him and his group. The girl replied what we already knew, namely that he felt cold, arrogant, and that she didn't like that guy. She also thanked Yunmu for saving her from there. Yunmu let him know that he had no one else to team up with, so that was the least of it. He also told her that some other students didn't want to talk to him, and I'm pretty sure he would continue that conversation if it hadn't been for the dimensional beast that suddenly seemed cutting off any dialogue. And it wasn't just one, it was 3. Yes, it may sound like there were quite a few, but they were low level, so it wasn't a big deal for Yunmu, but for Nuoji it was. She explained to her companion that they would have to be careful because dimensional beasts that are of a lower level and appeared in packs must have some leader, but that she did not know where she was hiding. Unfortunately for both of them, the leader was behind them, and it didn't take long to kick Yunmu away. Nuoji was surprised to see such a level of speed and destruction that desecrated the leader, although she could not observe much more since the giant robot was very sure that he wanted to cut it into pieces. Nuoji avoided the attack, expressing that a robot as big and dumb as him, with almost no anti-aircraft capabilities, was no match for her, so she attacked directly. As soon as he was going to hit him, the robot reached his height, making Nuoji surprised because if the robot could fly, that meant that he was an intermediate dimensional beast. That was something much more serious. Knowing that, Nuoji gave a scream of how scared she was and the robot taking advantage of her distraction, if it hadn't been for Yunmu, would have almost ripped off her arm. Yunmu told the girl that she was one of the top ranked in her class, so she didn't understand how she let an intermediate level dimensional beast make her panic. While our protagonist was saying that, the robot had been chewing Yunmu's arm for quite some time, so it's understandable that Yunmu was stressing. Our protagonist, by taking his arm out of the metal mouth of the robot, managed to give it a good blow, and then say that school uniforms were quite expensive, so the robot had to make sure to pay for it. Once the fallen beast and the pupils on the ground, Yunmu wondered if that thing was really an intermediate dimensional beast since it wasn't even that strong. Nuoji was staring at our protagonist, so what he did to get out of the matter was to shout that his arm hurt where he had been bitten by the beast. Nuoji told her that she didn't need to fake anything since she knew Yunmu had a great defense technique, to which Yunmu paled and demanded that she tell him how she knew that. Nuoji basically told him that the girl he had beaten a while ago with the pretty cool flux energy, that is, the redhead, was a very good friend of hers. She had also seen his match, and ordinary people who had seen him also thought that he had won solely because King Yu's kung fu, the red-haired girl, was quite weak. But she knew the destructive power of her friend's 36,000 cut forms, so when Yunmu resisted the hugging attack, she knew there was more to it. Even so, she also understood that Yunmu did not want to show his strength since after all, the world was still quite ugly with those who were too good. Yunmu didn't even know that he was too strong, so he originally didn't want people to know that he had a defensive technique since after all, an average person with a small family like his, adding that he possessed a definite technique would be quite questionable. But now that Nuoji knew, he told her that all he wanted was to spend some time as a relatively normal person. But that was over. Now he was going to stop pretending that he didn't have any techniques and that he was going to show all his cards. The girl, accepting what he was saying, pointed to the remaining dimensional beasts behind him, to which he turned and let out everything he had hidden as he wanted to spend a good time enjoying their company. By the look that Yunmu gave to the remaining dimensional beasts, all of them ran out of there. But as expected, our protagonist got each and every one of them. Once defeated to the last beast, Nuoji and her companion watched as nothing more surprised. While doing that, the boy found a place to ask Nuoji if there was any way for normal people, just like ordinary awakened people, to get the extraordinary energy that her friend had. Nuoji told her that was a high-level thing, but now that she knew his secret, she was going to tell her in return. He explained that in the same way he was going to make it useless to tell him, since the other way to get the extraordinary energy besides having the bloodline was to kill a dimensional beast of king class. If he were to absorb his beast crystal, Yunmu might have a small chance to awaken the true destructive flux energy. But the point was that such a method was very difficult and risky, not to mention that the king class beasts were extraordinary and had many dimensional beasts at their command. That secret had been kept by the top brass because they feared that the less capable fluxers would die in the attempt, thus causing a decline in the fluxers. So when Nuoji finished explaining that to Yunmu, logically he told him that he was going to die in the attempt, so he did not think about risking it. Yunmu told him that he knew he didn't have to risk it that way. While her companion asked her to behave, she and Yunmu began to cross the portal to return home. Professor Bowen, who was in charge of that task, was beginning to think why hell everyone was taking so long and if everything was going well in practice, when he noticed that the portal was having a rather particular reaction. But he was excited to notice that he was only announcing the arrival of the first group to finish the assignment. Nuoji repeated to Yunmu, as they left the portal, that it did not even occur to him to go in search of a beast of such power. Yunmu, annoyed, told her that she already knew that and didn't understand why she was so annoying, and why she behaved like her mother. When they finally left the portal, Professor Bowen was looking at them not at all surprised, but still told them that he was not expecting them to be the first to finish. Still, he asked them if they found the seventh ruin funny, although he didn't expect at all that Yunmu had interrupted him, kicking his face while demanding to know why there were intermediate dimensional beasts, if he had only said that there were going to be low-level dimensional beasts. He also told her that because of him, Nuoji almost died. Bowen was very sure he didn't know how those beasts got there, so Yunmu took his foot off his face and walked away shouting what was wrong with those teachers in the school. Bowen, amused, waited for Yunmu to get away enough to get up and say quietly that Yunmu still had energy for a lot, and that apparently the fact that he himself had selected an intermediate dimensional beast for Yunmu had not been enough to exploit his potential. On the other hand, another group was coming out of the portal, and as they were leaving, the boy Jin had paired with came chattering that with the speed at which they were going, they were definitely going to be the first group to finish, but he stopped talking as soon as he saw Yunmu's group. Our protagonist wasted no time in mockingly telling him that they had done a good job, but that he didn't understand how Wu, who was the guy who was chattering, could drag his Lord Jin's legs and make him come out so late. Moreover, he told him that he had to remember Jin had to have his eyes wide open for his Wu, so he didn't have to pick up anyone who is as bad as him. Wu yelled at him that he didn't have to be bragging about his arrival, and when he was about to take a step to go for Yunmu, Jin stopped him. Moments after more groups began arriving, Jin began to move to try to reach Nuoji quickly. Once in front of her, she asked her how her group had come out so fast, Plus, she didn't think Yunmu's strength was really that powerful. Nuoji wasn't sure what to answer, but what she did know was that she couldn't talk about Yunmu's ultimate technique because she couldn't believe that either. So she lied that she was able to get a fairly quick solution against dimensional beasts, whose nature could be easy to counteract. Jin swallowed it and believed that it had been just a coincidence of attributes. The students didn't wait for her to finish and started drawing conclusions pretty quickly. A guy started to say that Yunmu was very lucky to be in the same group as Nuoji since she was quite strong for having done everything on her own. Plus, she did nothing and was able to get the first place in practice. Daxing, who was next to the guy, made it very clear that he did not believe in luck as that was a lie invented to deceive ordinary people. 6 months later, we find a scene quite destroyed. Collapsed buildings and blood of dimensional beasts were everywhere, and the culprit of every rubble on the ground was Yunmu. He had been training for 6 months and from so much going to the ruins, he had become bored. Defeating the dimensional beasts of the 7th ruin no longer served him, but he still had to fulfill the training days since the next interesting contest was called the Middle Continent City Qualifying Tournament. Once in college again, Yunmu was sitting in the courtyard thinking that it had already been 6 months since he had inadvertently arrived. He had realized that his process in the last 6 months was pretty bad without the shadow system. And let's see, it had been 6 months since that system had been updating and he had not yet finished the update. For him that was more than unreasonable, so he sent the system to fry asparagus. He also sent the school to the same place since he didn't understand why the hell he liked to gather people so early in the morning. He had trained all night and was quite sleepy. Since the world heard his prayers, Demon appeared, asking for everyone's attention. He began by saying that there was not much to tell them, only that the reason they summoned them all was to let them know that the long-awaited event would take place within a week. The qualifying battle would be within a week, so at that time, the Heavenly Cloud Castle was going to land on the Lamu River. There, newcomers from each city would have to go out in teams of 5 to 7 people to kill the beasts of the fortress. In addition, the total number of points that have been earned by killing the dimensional beasts could be used to complete the score of the prosperous Wind City with that of the other cities. And, after explaining that, several balloon-shaped cameras peeked out. He explained that they were called dimensional space eyes and that they would follow each student 24 hours a day, and that every move the students made would be broadcast live to all the major cities of the world, so there would be no need to cheat. He reminded them not to forget to collect their survivor armors as they were specially prepared for newcomers to the Fluxers Guild. Plus, they were free to form the groups on their own. He concluded by wishing them good luck and their best effort. When Yunmu picked up his survival armor, he didn't like it at all. He preferred the armor that his father had given him. But since nothing else could be done, he resigned himself and went to find Nuoji to make a team. What he did not expect was that the girl told him that she was already in a group. Yunmu was surprised at how fast he was. Nuoji explained that the guild had made arrangements before and had been told that she was going to team up with Jin and Wu because the guild believed that distributing the best awakened in different squads would not favor the classification of the prosperous Wind City. Yunmu asked him not to worry about it. Nuoji asked her very embarrassed what she was going to do, to which Yunmu told her that she would already manage. He walked away from her, but in his head he knew there was no one else who wanted him to be on their team. But, luckily of fate, Daxing appeared and called him. Yunmu turned around, and when Daxing was in front of him, he asked him if he wanted to join his team. Several things were going on in Yunmu's head, and one of them was why Zhang Daxing wanted to team up with him if he never had any kind of contact. Even so, Yunmu agreed, and Daxing, very happy, took him to where the rest of the group was. When he arrived, he wanted to leave. Those in that group, yes, were rich, quite, but they were nerds with zero physical aptitude. Yunmu thought that whether it was the landlord's son's rescue party or a very bad joke, Daxing was still very happy to have formed his own group and announced that the group was called the Big Bear. He asked someone to come and tell Dean and that the group was more than ready when Lingen, one of Yunmu's new classmates, told Daxing that they couldn't say anything to the Dean because it takes at least 5 people to form a team and they were 4. Yunmu, while listening to Daxing's cries, was thinking about whether it was too late to escape from that group since they were all idiots. The next day, they were giving Yunmu 7,500 dimensional coins for selling his survival armor. He did not yet believe that he had been given only 7,500 coins. He needed even more to be able to afford a good tent and certain other things for the tournament. At the store where he was buying his gadgets, he pretty much envied his fellow billionaires. 2 of them were ordering one of every available gadget in the store. To his greatest remorse, Daxing appeared asking him if he was not going to buy anything, to which he replied that not everyone was like Daxing. Daxing began to tease that he didn't have enough money to buy his things, so she asked him how he did if he didn't have a car or tent or all the other necessities he needed to have on hand. Yunmu made it very clear to him that if he didn't have a car he could run, and if he didn't have a tent, he could comfortably sleep on the ground. His companion began to cry, telling him that he did not know how pathetic he was, but that he was not going to let that continue to happen. So he grabbed his hand. They re-entered the gadget shop, and Daxing shouted to the nearest salesman to wrap all the tools they had and to have it once. He threw his card on the counter, and once he bought the tools, the salesman let him know that he had spent 143,000 dimensional coins. Yunmu was more than impressed, but Daxing didn't stop there. He also bought a late model car, ordered another for next week, and the most expensive tent the tent had. In total, the guy had spent more than 10 million dimensional coins. By card, Yunmu's last thoughts were that he had been adopted by a rich father and how important it was to be a millionaire. The next day, in the Fluxer Guild, were Jin and Wu talking about whether Yunmu could really play in the qualifying tournament. Jin wasn't sure about that, but Wu was 100% sure Yunmu wasn't going to get a team, since the only one who could do that was Nuoji, and she was in her group. Jin didn't understand the hatred Wu had against Yunmu, so he asked his companion what his problem with him was. Wu expressed that he didn't like that Yunmu was arrogant coming from a low-status family, and that he was disgusted just by seeing him. That said, if Jin hadn't taken Wu off the road where he was standing, he might have been made mush. Wu didn't like that at all and began demanding answers from the driver, who was parked several meters away from him. When Wu found out who the driver was, he almost had a heart attack. Yunmu rolled down the car window and greeted him. Wu, after watching Yunmu get out of his new car, asked him what the hell he was doing there, to which our protagonist replied quite jovially that he was there to pick up a mission, since anyway the classification battle was going to take place in that place. So he went to look for some missions to lift, crossing your fingers that some of them could be completed without problems. Wu started laughing at him and then asked him if he had already found a team. Before Yunmu answered, Daxing shouted his name at him, causing Wu to turn to see them better. It turns out that there was Yunmu's entire team, and when Daxing let him know that he had been waiting for him and asked him about how the car was and that if he didn't measure up he was going to buy him a new one, Wu almost fainted. Jin's partner yelled at the team whether they were playing or what, because they were a group of rich people with a back door, and if all they would do would be to take their money and crush the dimensional beasts with it. He also added that his group was missing a member, so they were nothing. Yunmu knew that missing a member was totally correct, so when he saw the leader of his group, he asked him to calm down since everything was more than resolved and that it was not long before the missing member arrived. In that, the sound of the engine of a fairly powerful motorcycle made everyone turn. When the fifth member arrived, Wu began to sneer until he noticed that the fifth member was the top student of Fenghua City's second middle school, Ling Xuan. The only one who greeted her with joy on her face was Daxing, while Lingyan was quite angry that her sister was there. As soon as the word sister came out of Lingyan's mouth, Yunmu blurted out that there was no way they could share the same family genes, and he was quite right. They were absolutely not the same. That is, yes, they had jet black hair, and yes, they were pale complexion, but that's as far as their similarities went. Lingyan was offended by the remark, and while he and Yunmu were fighting, Jin hurriedly told Xuan that she was from an outer city and teaming up with someone from the prosperous Wind City was considered cheating, so all the score she earned would not go back to her city. Xuan clarified that she had been transferred from city to city and that was less pleasing to her brother. On the other side, Wu asked his companion discreetly if Xuan was good. Jin took the time to explain that the overall ranking of Fenghua City was far superior to that of prosperous Wind City, and that Xuan was already second-rank Black Crystal. In addition, Jin had heard a rumor that for some years now, a formidable fluxer had accepted Xuan as his disciple, and since then he has been training in 2 formidable battle skills. Basically, Jin told her companion that Xuan was one of the best of her generation. Daxing let Xuan know that he didn't expect her to really want to help them, but thanked her by telling her that with her the group had officially been completed. Xuan greeted him in response and told his brother that he had grown quite a bit. Her brother, on the other hand, sent her back to Fenghua City immediately. Xuan, not giving her brother time to react, took his cheek in his hand and demanded to know how he could say such things, because when her parents found out that Lingyan was the last in her class they were so angry that they sent her to watch him very closely. While the two of them were fighting, Daxing warned Yunmu that it was time to see the professor, which our protagonist accepted. A week later, the castle of Celestial Cloud had successfully managed to attract the attention of the entire continent. Already in the tournament, the floodgates opened, and the castle hoped that the students would represent the prosperous Wind City well. Once the floodgates were open, piles of cars shot out. The people who were watching the tournament on the screens were more than excited to see that event. Even Yunwoo's father, who was still in the hospital, asked his daughter to help him settle in so he could watch the event from his TV. Back in competition, Jin's team was ready. Woo was sure that with his driving skills no one could beat them, and if they did, the dimensional beasts were all going to be theirs. Jin, admiring Woo's skill and confidence, told him that the map showed a fairly safe stretch of the river and suggested that he stay there for a long time. He also ordered his team to put on their combat armor and prepare for battle. Nuoji was the only one who ignored Jin's order as she was thinking about whether Yunwoo would be okay because she didn't even know if he had made any groups. On the other side, Jin noticed that there was something chasing them, so he told everyone to be vigilant. Woo thought it was too early for him to be a dimensional beast, but he still obeyed his leader's order. As soon as he saw in his rear view mirror that it was a car chasing them, he almost gave him something. Woo was sure that there was no car faster than his own since he had set it up himself. Plus there was no one in the heavenly cloud castle who drove better than him. Or so he thought until the car behind him passed him easily. When he saw who it was, he couldn't believe it. It was Yunwoo's new team, and the one behind the wheel was none other than Xiuan herself. As soon as they passed them and reached the site first of all, Yunwoo asked them where they were in such a hurry to be the first that they did not even decide their fate. Xiuan replied that she had no problem going wherever they wanted since the dimensional beasts, they were not so difficult for her. Her brother, on the other hand, was much less confident than she was and suggested that they go to a relatively safe place since Jin and the others would score many more points than all of them anyway, which was not the worst-case scenario. Daxing differed with Lingen, letting it be known that they had Xiuan and Thor's car that could move quite quickly, so he pointed to the map and selected a place, announcing that it would be his first stop. Liu Kang didn't think of the idea since that was the area where the dwarf witch monsters operated. Yunwoo watched him quite confused and asked him what he was talking about. Lingen was the one who replied by telling him that this was the toughest dimensional beast in that part of the Lamu River. Lingen was so afraid that she asked her sister if those monsters were that tough. Xiuan explained to him that if it was just a dwarf witch, he was not strong at all and was quite weak. But the problem was that dwarf witch monsters were social creatures and had a rather extreme hatred towards humans. Those monsters, when attacking, tended to form a group of dwarf witches, and once they managed to surround you, there was no way to escape. Daxing told him that was exactly why he wanted to go there. Nobody wanted to be there, and that meant that if they went there, the points were going to be all theirs and there would be no one to try to take them away. Liu Kang basically yelled at his leader for being so crazy and putting everyone's life at risk. Lingen agreed with Kang, adding a few more things. Daxing asked him to stop being so dramatic and not to worry since his sister was also there. Yunwoo asked Xiuan for her opinion, to which she let it be known that they could do whatever they wanted, since it was them who chose that kind of thing. Yunwoo voted in favor, and Daxing too, so it was 3 votes to 2. With the decision made, Xiuan started the car, and while he started driving, his brother was shouting at him to leave him there, to please let him get out of the car. His sister silenced him, telling him to save his breath, that he was more likely to die there alone than to the place they went, with all the equipment. Once they arrived at the site, Daxing reported that a little further on was the dwarf witch's activity zone, so he advised them to put on survival armor and prepare to fight. After a few minutes, everyone was ready. Daxing had his Jinza exterminator armament placed with force cannon included. Lingen had his chasing Jinza weaponry with cross crucifixion included. Liu Kang had his matching Ginza hunter weaponry. Xiuan had his main fighter suit, and once Daxing asked for Yunwoo, Yunwoo came out with his suit on. As soon as his leader observed him, he quickly ran to him and asked him where the hell he had found such armor. Yunwoo didn't even understand, so Daxing proceeded to explain to him that this armor was from the armed forces of the Temple of the God of War, and that even with all the money in the world you could not buy that kind of armor. Having clarified that, Daxing began to grope Yunwoo so that he could admire that armor. Although his father had given him that thing, Yunwoo wanted to know where he had gotten it. But he did not have time to continue thinking as Xiuan heard something approaching them and sent them to hide. Everyone quickly listened to him and began to hide. Already hidden, Xiuan asked Daxing for a situation report. Luckily for everyone, Daxing was targeting 2 dwarf witches apparently patrolling. Xiuan told him to make sure there were no other dimensional beasts around, to which he confirmed there were none more. From there, Xiuan sent Yunwoo and Daxing to move. And so, without more to wait, Daxing threw a bait. The little dwarf witch chopped her bait and fell to the floor with a single shot. The other companion of the dwarf witch also fell as fast as his friend thanks to Yunwoo's violent blade. thus successfully fulfilling the mission. Meanwhile, in the alliance of the Fluxers, they were talking about the Black Emperor's city excelling that year, so strong that they were already in the top 4 after only half a day. Nor did they understand how the City of Nine had achieved such a formidable position in that year, since last year they were in the 49th position and already in that year they had already entered the top 30. They were also astonished to see that the prosperous Windy City last year was in the 130 position, but managed to climb to the top 70 that year. One guy said that he had heard that the prosperous Wind City had a new rookie named Luojian, so he guessed it was because of him that they were climbing so fast. Another guy, or well, rather Professor Bowen, asked him to stop being ridiculous since he couldn't get that many points. Now, in another scene, we have Swan's younger brother running from the dwarf witches while calling for help. He had been the bait that time, so he shouted at Yunmu that it was his turn to attack. Yunmu wasted no time and with several violent knives killed a few, although that does not mean that Lingyan was not expected to run, leaving him alone with the dwarf witches. As he too was in a hurry to finish, he made it clear to the dwarf witches that his death was going to do too quickly. They weren't going to feel the pain. Again summoning his violent blades, he began cutting off various parts of each dwarf witch, causing them to fall to the floor quickly. When he thought he was done, he turned around, and when he started to walk away, 2 dwarf witches came out of the afterlife, quite annoyed. Yunmu was going to attack, but Xuan and Daxing attacked first from afar. Once finished, Xuan reminded Yunmu to concentrate on running as they were quite in a hurry and overdue. He also told her that she did not have to escape the dwarf witch left over, since if she did, she would inform others of her class. Just as Yunmu was going to chase him, Liu Kang appeared quite excited. He asked to leave it to him, and activating his murderous death blow called the Pursuer of Life, he wiped out the dimensional beast. Yunmu congratulated them all on their good work in the surge, while Xuan reported that they had killed 30 to 40 dwarf witches, so they must have scored a lot of points with those 4 waves. Daxing, with enough energy to overflow, said that it was necessary to take advantage while everyone was fit, so he told Lingyan to go and bring another wave of dwarf witches from outside to do it again. Lingyan, quite annoyed, shouted at him that he almost died, that he was not going to act as bait for the 5th time in a row, and that he was quitting. Daxing seemed to agree with him, because he said that then Yunmu would be the bait, and leave it to Lingyan the task of fighting with the dwarf witches. Swan's brother had his tension lowered when his leader mentioned that he had to fight them, so he didn't think twice when offering himself again as bait on the only condition that he didn't fight the dimensional beasts. Yunmu, who was watching the scene without understanding anything, watched as Daxing stuck out his tongue and smiled at him. Moments later, Daxing went in search of Xuan to find out what he was doing. She replied that she was thinking about whether Yunmu had really woken up less than a year ago, because she didn't understand anything. Daxing sat next to her and had told her that it was true, that he had heard that only Yunmu had woken up a few days before his test. Both watched Yunmu for a few moments until Xuan picked up the conversation again. He told her that if it has only been 6 months since he woke up, how could he be so powerful? That wasn't normal. Daxing claimed that it was obviously not normal, and he knew it, and that was why he had invited him to be part of his team. Before Xuan could say anything else, his brother came running excitedly for help. When everyone turned to see him, they were impressed. While Lingyan was yelling at them to get ready to run, the others were assimilating that and had brought to them a wave of dwarf witch leaders. Xuan and Daxing shouted at the same time as they were all retreating, and from there, they all ran away with the wave of dwarf witch leaders glued to their heels. They ran so much that when they managed to lose the dwarf witch leaders, it was already night, so they quickly started looking for a place to camp. Once found, they started making a campfire and fixing everything they needed for camping. Daxing congratulated that it was an excellent harvest when everyone was sitting, surrounding the campfire. While talking, Liu Kang was checking the statistics of the group, when he blurted out that Yunmu alone had managed to wipe out 230 dimensional beasts, and that accounted for 43% of the team's contribution, while Xuan wiped out 92 dimensional beasts, accounting for 35% of the contribution. The classmates in the group looked at Xuan and Yunmu in amazement. They had their eyes full of admiration for them.